Welcome to the Book Show, a celebration of reading and writers. I'm Joe Donahue. Cloud Cuckoo Land, the highly anticipated new novel from Anthony Doerr, whose Pulitzer Prize-winning novel All the Light We Cannot See spent more than 200 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Cloud Cuckoo Land follows several storylines. Anna and Omir on opposite sides of the formidable city wall during the 1453 siege of Constantinople. Teenage idealist Seymour and gentle octogenarian Zeno in an attack on a public library in present-day Idaho, and Constance on an interstellar ship bound for a distant exoplanet decades from now. A single copy of an ancient text, the story of Aethon, who longs to be turned into a bird so that he can fly to the paradise of Cloud Cuckoo Land, provides solace, mystery, and the most profound human connection to these five characters. Anthony Doerr uses one of humanity's oldest technologies, the book, to illuminate our abiding opportunities for connection and empathy. The new novel is Cloud Cuckoo Land, and it is a pleasure to welcome Anthony Doerr to this week's book show. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks so much for having me on, Joe.
It's a real pleasure having you on the program. First of all, I can't tell you how much fun it was to read this book, but boy, saying Cloud Cuckoo Land that many times is a lot of fun, too.
Yeah, a lot of consonants. Yeah. Had you heard the phrase before, Joe?
You know, I had heard the phrase when I was growing up. My mother would occasionally use it. Now, you can prove her wrong. She has passed, so she won't know. But she always attributed it to an Irish phrase. And I don't know if that's true or not.
Interesting. I do know that it's pretty prevalent in Irish English, that, you'll see it in newspapers, or often if you see maybe a politician is being disparaged for living in Cloud Cuckoo Land. So-and-so thinks COVID will go away tomorrow. He might be they might dismiss him by saying he lives in Cloud Cuckoo Land. But of course, the phrase vastly outdates English. It's 2,400 years old. It was
right.
In ancient Greek something like Nephilokokuya, and it comes from a play by Aristophanes, a comic play called The Birds, in which these two kind of doofuses decide that Athens has too many lawyers and decide to found a new city in the sky. And they call this place Cloud Cuckoo Land, halfway between the realm of the gods in the heaven and people down on earth. And it may be the first written utopian story in Western literature. So as I was watching my kids, the book took me 7 years to write, and as I'm watching my kids grow up from 10 to 17, my twin boys during this time, taking so many dystopias when they're, reading Hunger Games, or they're watching all these Marvel movies where planets are blowing up or cities are on fire all the time. I just wondered, what is it about utopian stories that could be compelling? And what does it mean through time that so many human cultures have dreamed of better places and told stories about better places far away?
So what brought you to Cloud Cuckoo Land? Because ultimately you find the story and then you wrote it. The one that we read about in the book is something that you have written.
That's right. It's an invented story by a real author. So I was so ignorant about the classics. In high school, we read the Odyssey and we read, I think, Oedipus Rex, but that was about as far as my classical education went. And so, it was until I was probably 30 that I started to realize that of all the texts that are written in the ancient world, only a tiny fraction have managed to pegboard down this, impossible gauntlet of hurdles through history to make it into the present day. Fires and floods and worms and tyrants and the acid within paper itself and religious zealots. There's so many things working against the manuscript surviving all those centuries. It's just so interesting to learn there are people who studied their whole lives. They studied lost books. And so pretty early on, I knew I wanted to show the power of a single gesture of stewardship, of what this one girl in Constantinople named Anna does when she saves this maybe the very last copy of this very old book. So I was looking at all, there were novels written in the ancient world. At least many scholars are willing to call them novels. They were long prose tales. We have about 5 left in ancient Greek, but we have tiny pieces of others that have been found in Egyptian garbage dumps. And we have the titles of at least 20 others that have been totally lost. And one of those was written by this guy named Antonius Diogenes. And apparently he was a really playful writer. All we have left, which is so interesting, Joe, is is a book review, basically a summary of this novel written about 700 or 800 years after the novel was written. Then the novel vanishes from the world entirely. And all we have is this critical appraisal of this novel. But it sounds like Diogenes was a really creative person. He was maybe like the Nabokov or the Borges of the ancient world. And this novel had 24 sections and it involved a trip around the world. It may have involved a trip to the moon. So it might have been kind of the first science fiction story in a sense. So as soon as I learned that, I thought, I'm going to invent a novel that this guy could have written and have it kind of land in the laps of these 5 characters through time and mean something to them, arrive in their lives when they need it most.
Well, and when you say mean something, it means something to us in learning about that, because it proves your whole point, right? That Diogenes didn't write this particular story that you are telling us, and yet he did write a story and we have lost it. And that's really the point of this, that there are keepers to the keys to the bridge that make sure that these books and these texts move forward.
That's it. Yeah, you're one of them, Joe. Anybody who's helping connect readers and writers as part of book culture, they're helping being stewards of books. This novel, Cloud Cuckoo Land, is dedicated to librarians, really because, growing up, I was, my mom used the library for me and my brothers as kind of a third place between school and home,
Right.
a place to kind of let us run wild in a way, or let our intellects run wild, and especially. But when you're a kid, you just think, oh, libraries are in every community, in every country, and they're just there. And of course, communities make free books available to people to take home. And then you realize as you get older, you're like, oh my gosh, humans are keeping the lights on. Humans are funding these places. They're deciding to, grow these collections and allow us to come in and heating these public spaces. Libraries in many communities are the last indoor public space, especially in the winter, that people can access. And now, so many Americans still don't have reliable internet connections. There's such a fundamental lifeline to people. So I just wanted to kind of remind myself of the power of libraries and the power of librarians as stewards for human culture. And so each of the 5 characters has a relationship with a librarian in some sense or another, even all the way back in the 15th century. And hopefully the book is an homage to librarians.
Well, first of all, my mom was a librarian, and as I was reading this book, I kept on thinking about the importance of that. And of course, as we go through the various time periods of the book, I was brought back to the time when, as a very young child, I don't remember, you and I are roughly the same age, you're a little bit younger, but my library card was, I don't know, it's bigger than they are now, bigger than a credit card, but it had this metal chip on it with the numbers, and you could you'd always see where your number was, and it just felt like it was a passport to the world. You could get whatever you wanted, and that's a amazing, quite frankly, beautiful feeling that comes through in this book, because you realize, and so many of these characters realize, that importance.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love your phrase, passport to the world. Really, for me, it's a passport to the universe,
Yeah.
because I'm also taking things home that let you travel through space or travel through time. Or the first time I encounter Anne Frank, is this book you take out of the library and you realize, oh, this girl has been erased from the world. She's been murdered. And yet, because she participated in this magic of writing things down and putting it into a book, putting it into a notebook, then she's still alive. Her voice still sings to us because somebody stewarded that notebook and published it. And you can't articulate all those things as a kid, but I hope that as you see Zeno, for example, operating the library in this rural place in Idaho in the 1950s, or you see this girl Anna, in 1453, moving through this old library, trying to find these moldy old books and rescue one, that you get a sense of how rare it is that something survives through time, and how humans are the ones who do that. And ultimately, it's a selfless gesture, because what you're saying is, this thing is more important than me, and it will outlast my own life. And really, I hope it helped us all think, maybe decenter ourselves a little bit and think, what little decisions can we make today or in the years to come that will improve the lives of the people who will be on this planet when we're gone?
Anthony Doerr is our guest on this week's book show. The name of the new novel is Cloud Cuckoo Land. It is published by Scribner. 5 protagonists living in different times, and The links to these stories, as you talked about, is really interesting. But there's 400 chapters. There's 105 characters with names. That's a lot to keep track of. I don't have to tell you this.
Yes. Yeah, I hope readers will bear with me. What I'm trying to do is suggest that lots of things that seem unconnected in life actually are. And I think science is, especially in the past 10 years, it's also reminding us of this all the time, these incongruous connections that you at first don't see, how the loss of ice in Greenland might affect the weather in Tampa or in the UK. But because that affects the Gulf Stream, it does. And I think there's so many lessons in literature that help our imaginations imagine these kinds of connections. So I'm trying to say, hold Anna in your mind or hold Omir in your mind back in the 15th century. And those plates are hopefully spinning in your subconscious as you read the novel, and you go to the next page, the next character, the next chapter, and you start to feel, oh yeah, there are these faint tendrils connecting really all humans through time. And I think reading is this wonderful way to remind ourselves and to train our imaginations to imagine and reimagine those connections.
Do you think there is a moment in the novel that opens up to everybody where they say, "Oh, okay, now I see where this is headed. Now I see how these stories are related"? Or do you think that moment comes at different times for different readers?
Yeah, I think the latter. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about participating in this art is that the reader and the writer collaborate together, and you can never, as a writer, totally predict or control all the interpretations a reader will bring with her into a manuscript. So I love that. I think, that every person who read All the Light We Cannot See, for example, might imagine Uncle Etienne's apartment in Saint Malo, France differently. And if I asked them to draw it, they would draw a slightly different version than I drew when I was trying to imagine the apartment. So I love that. I love that readers and writers meet each other in the middle, and together you kind of actively recreate this world.
I often ask authors about outlines, but that seems silly in asking you about it. But I would think you would need like a diagram. Like you would need like a huge whiteboard with just all kinds of different colored markers on it to say, all right, A, B, L, K.
Yeah, that's it. But I rent a little office suite, which is filled with people who do normal jobs, and I always feel like people must think I'm hunting a serial killer or something when they glimpse inside my office, because I do have lines and diagrams and printouts of old manuscripts and oxen pulling cannons, and so yes, often I will draw. I think drawing helps me maybe imagine the architecture of a novel, especially one with as complicated a structure as this one. So I kind of tended to see it as, almost as like a root stock, something running under the ground that would send up shoots. So I have the kind of the fable of Cloud Cuckoo Land. It's in 24 parts, 24 letters in the ancient Greek alphabet, so alpha to omega, running down the center. And then I kind of wind all 5 characters around it, kind of like roots intertwining. So then I would draw one day Zeno's sections and try to understand how he would move through the novel towards the climax of his story, and when and where he would intersect with the other characters' storylines.
Do you have to write it in a linear fashion, or were you ever worried about losing track of saying, yeah, I don't know how I'm going to end all this?
Yeah, good question. Well, first, for beginning writers out there, let me remind you that there are as many ways to do it as there are writers. So my way is not the only way by any means. But in my case, I rarely will write something in the chronology in which a reader will read it. Often it's just like, say, going for a walk or a run. You kind of want to know at least roughly how far you're going and what your destination will be once you start out. So I'll be a third of the way into the project, and I'm often working on the ending or connective tissue, building bridges towards that ending long before I've written scenes that a reader might read a third of the way through the book. You're never going to be totally efficient. As Americans, we love to worship efficiency,
Right.
and you have to allow yourself to wander down paths and write pages and pages that you won't use in a final draft. So it's sometimes a garden of many forking paths, but often I try to make sure I'm hewing to some sense of overall structure, just so that I'm not spending months and months writing scenes that eventually will have to go.
We'll note that this novel was 7 years in the making. So is there an assembly phase
Absolutely. Yes. Same. So All the Light We Cannot See, the novel I wrote before this, took me 10 years. And that also is composed of many short chapters. And so what I really started to do 17 years ago when I started with that novel was often in the evenings, I'll print out these little chapterettes. Often they're like 800 words, maybe 2 pages, 2.5 pages. I'll lay them out on the carpet and try to see kind of how they're interacting. Read the end of one and the beginning of the next. Try to get a sense of what resonances you can build between them as you start assembling them, to use your verb for sure. Each day as a writer, you're kind of moving more from this like swirling mess in your head and more towards the reader, towards Joe all the way across the country, who I can't tap on the shoulder while he's reading and say, oh, no, you're missing something. So each day, hopefully, you try to move slightly, fractionally closer to the reader, the stranger on the bus experiencing the novel. And a lot of that is assembly work. Then you sleep, you look at it, you think, I'm going to read through as much as I can. Once a novel's over 200 or 300 pages, you can't read through the whole thing that day.
Right.
But you try to read through as much as you can, fine tune it, understand what's there, and try to keep the paint wet on as much of it as you can.
Oh, I love that idea of keeping the paint wet. So that would seem to me that you can't be away from it for too long.
Yeah, yeah. Even just something as innocent as Thanksgiving or something, often I'll try to still open, I try to open the file on my computer. The subconscious is so interesting. I find that if I don't look at a book I'm working on for a few minutes, even if it's just 15 minutes on a certain day, at Christmas or something, you're really busy, then your subconscious doesn't really work on it when you're walking the dogs or when you're, washing the dishes or doing something or taking a shower. That can often be a really productive time. So as long as I open it, kind of keep the ice from freezing over, then I find that I'm solving some of the problems I've made for myself later in the day. It comes back up and kind of boils back up into your conscious mind.
Anthony, I hope you don't hate me for saying this, but I read Cloud Cuckoo Land before I read All the Light We Cannot See. Okay. Now that I've admitted that horrible thing.
That's not horrible at all.
But in reading All the Light We Cannot See after Cloud Cuckoo Land, it seems that there is a spark in that book, in All the Light We Cannot See, a spark that would have given birth to the idea of Cloud Cuckoo Land. Is that true? Is that about when you started thinking about it, what could be next?
You got it. Absolutely. All the Light is set at a time during the Second World War when a new technology arrives in the world, radio, this
Here
amazing
we are.
technology we're
Yes.
using right now. And it really disrupted power structures, as many, many, many people know. The propaganda, use of propaganda in the 30s by the German Socialist Party really leads to the rise of the Third Reich and helps control the truth. It helps distort the information that can enter millions of homes in Germany. And so it's a new technology that can pass through walls, in a sense. And so really, I think a lot of my work quietly is interested in technology because Cloud Cuckoo Land really started with this other very interesting moment in history in the 15th century. The printing press is just about to arrive on the scene, and the preeminent defensive technology to this point in the Western world and many other places, especially China, are walls, walled cities. If you built big, sturdy walls, like the walls of Constantinople, which were maybe the preeminent defensive technology in the Western world, they can withstand, it can help you accumulate wealth and build culture inside of your cities. But then gunpowder spills into Europe in the 1400s, and the next thing you know, there's a new technology that has arrived that's really disrupting power structure. And this young Ottoman Sultan, he's 19 years old, has this founder build these massive mega cannons, which are both physical and psychological weapons. And he drags them kilometer after kilometer through the spring mud to the walls of Constantinople, where the books of the ancient world really have decayed all over the place in Europe and North Africa. About 75% of the Greek texts that we have transmitted from copies inside Constantinople. So without those walls, we might not have Plato or Aristotle or the tiny bit of Sappho's poetry that we do still have. So for me, I think definitely the seed was planted in All the Light as I'm reading about walls, the power of the Atlantic Wall, this thing that Hitler was trying to build to defend against invasions. So I love to chase curiosities, and this was another opportunity to learn as I was working. Just like your job, I just love to be able to try to learn every day. And so this novel was a great opportunity to rectify more ignorances that I have about the Middle Ages and how books land into the present.
The idea too that, and in this book of there are those walls, but there are voices within those walls that are telling us stories.
Absolutely. And voices that can slip through walls. And maybe
Yes.
that's the fundamental metaphor of the novel is for me, my life would be so much poorer without books. I think books are this way for me to slip out of the confines, the walls of my own skull and imagine other lives and maybe even live multiple lives. I feel like anytime I'm feeling low or down, I realize, oh, that's because I finished a book and I haven't quite fallen into a new novel that's really engaging me. And I think I'm happiest when I'm really engaged in a book so that in the evening after dinner or before bed, I get a few minutes to go live this other life and slip outside the walls of my own life.
We learn in this novel the importance of survival of the book, but also you write very much about the protection and survival of nature.
That's right. Yeah. I think the novel exists along a continuum of destruction and erasure on one side and stewardship and conservation on the other. And I felt it was kind of a moral imperative to show that through the generations how present the natural world is in, say, Anna and Omir's lives in the 15th century. There's birds everywhere. Omir, his closest companions are these two oxen who help pull this cannon to the walls of Constantinople. And to show how those relationships are starting to fray as we move towards the present and into the future. So I wanted to ask all kinds of questions about survival of the species over time. There's this argument that was prevalent anyway a few years ago that maybe the reasons novelists weren't taking on big questions about climate change is because novels don't generally encompass enough time to ask those questions. And so now I think there's a whole range, a really rich tradition beginning of climate fiction. I think I was just trying to contribute in some small way to those same questions. What does it mean to be on a planet where the species needs to continue long after we're gone? And maybe becoming a parent is part of that too, watching
Sure.
my kids grow up and realizing that my life really isn't all that important. What's important is that there's a pleasant enough temperature and enough water and enough food for the next generations.
Let me ask you about Constance because she is the bridge to the future, and it's hard, given what you just said about the climate and where we're headed. Well, what does this mean for the future Constance of the world?
It was a scary moment in bed that night, maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when I decided I'm going to set a portion of this novel in the future because I don't really know how to do that,
Yeah.
and I can already hear listeners be like, oh, well, that sounds interesting about Constantinople, but I'm not sure I'm ready for the spaceship part of it. But I thought the real way to dramatize the power of Anna's action saving this old book was to show it land not only in the hands of readers now, but the hands of a reader in the future. Constance is really the reader for whom this text is bound. And I just wanted to use her time to explore all these new technologies, the promises of artificial intelligence mixing with the dangers and perils of it, and these claims that we'll be able to build comprehensive knowledge. And what does that mean? Right now with Wikipedia and the internet, all I feel generally is this kind of deluge of information. I'm not sure it's making me any wiser, for example. So I build this virtual library in Constance's world that may or may not be infinite, a very Borgesian library. And what does that mean to her? And then, of course, there are pandemics, and the Earth has changed quite a bit in our times. Obviously, Constance is dealing with the perils of climate chaos mixed with the promises and perils of AI.
Of course, we have mentioned All the Light We Cannot See. 4 years on the New York Times bestsellers list, 15 million copies sold. No one prepares you for that. That's lightning in a bottle.
No.
That doesn't happen really to anybody, but it happened to you, and that must be just amazing and scary and incredible and weird.
That's really astute and kind. Thanks, Joe. That's it. All those adjectives are perfect. There's days you're just so grateful. I mean, I can pay for my kids' college education. That was in doubt for a long time. And
Yep.
so that's just an amazing gift. But there's also so many eyes on your work. And, I used to, it's just me. I don't have a research staff. And so, I used to go over it as much as I can, but now you're like, oh my gosh, there's no way I'm getting everything right in this historical detail, and I'm going to hear about it. So you just kind of brace yourself for that and try to think, well, together we're going to crowdsource the paperback and make it better. Thankfully, writing is so engaging to me and interesting to me that usually 5 minutes into my day, I put on these noise canceling headphones when I work, and generally, I think those kinds of questions go away, and I'm just trying to solve the problems that I've made for myself in my sentences. And I'm so immensely grateful to have that readership. But if I think about it too much, it can kind of stop me. So I think I just got to disappear into the sentences. I love to do the work regardless of the results. I hope that's a lesson for everybody out there. You're like, just go build your castles in the sky. Don't worry so much about how they're going to be received, whether that means, whether you're an architect or a quilter or a musician, just make your things. And then ultimately, capitalism, all those things kind of exist outside of your mind. And that's the right place for them to be, I think. I think about, there's a beautiful quote from James Baldwin that I won't totally be able to do verbatim, but he talks about how it was through Dickens and Dostoevsky that he learned that people around the world and in the past and in the future all feel kind of the same things he felt, and that for a while he thought he was the only person feeling these things, and it was through books that taught him that his feelings were common. And when you feel recognized in a book, it feels so good. We need more and more voices to help everybody find themselves in books, and then I think you feel less alone in the world.
Anthony Doerr's new novel is Cloud Cuckoo Land. It is published by Scribner. Anthony, thank you so much for spending time with us. What a delight to have you on the program.
Oh, thanks so much, Joe. Thanks for all your work connecting writers and readers.
We enjoy hearing from our listeners about our shows. You can email us at book@wamc.org. You can listen again to this or find past book shows via podcast or at wamc.org. Sarah LeDuc produces our program. Bookmark us for next week. And thanks for listening for The Book Show. I'm Joe Donahue.